Chairman, Jason Christensen.
Okay, so I'm just going to walk around freely. It felt better this way. Anyway, I've had a lot of thoughts of what I can do, what I should be speaking on, because the job of the chairman is for encouragement, to lifting, to bring unity to our party, to everyone within the party, to inspire, to uplift. So, about a month or two ago, I watched for my first time, and it's turned into being one of my favorite movies, The Greatest Showman. The Greatest Showman is about P.T. Barnum, who, according to the movie, not according to real life, but according to the movie, is this guy that got laid off from his job. He's throughout all his life, he's been kicked about and just expelled from society. He gets his idea to create a show, bringing people who's also been kicked about. All of us independents here have been kicked about by the Republican and Democrat parties. Those are the reason why all of us are here, because if we ran for office in those parties, they would not accept us. Why? Because we are free thinkers. We actually study the facts. We are principle-based. We cannot be bought. So that's why the Independent American Party has been growing, has been the fastest growing political party in Utah since 2014. The vision of P.T. Barnum had that vision of uniting everyone together. In the movie, one of my most favorite songs in the movie is when his friends conducting the circus get one again expelled from a high society dinner. And they sing this great song that's saying, you know what, we cannot be stopped, we will be listened to, we will go forth and carry out this vision, we will stand together as a family. Independent American Party, yeah, we may be a political party, but there's a lot more to this party than just a political party. We are a movement. We are a family of independent thinkers, independent Americans from sea to sea, and in this state from within the borders. We are united as a family where we stand together, no matter what may be said by any one of us, no matter what harassment we get from the media, no matter what happens, we should stand together as one body, as a family. So, and with that being said, this year will be our year to win. Not just win percentages, not just win hearts and minds, but win actual elections. And the best way to do that is if we work together as one. So, as we're campaigning for the U.S. Senate for Reed, up in Davis County, we can say, oh, we have an excellent candidate for county commissioner, Tamara. If we're in St. George, oh, we have an excellent candidate for State House, as well as U.S. Senate. If we're in Orem, Pro, and Orem, we have excellent candidates X, Y, and Z, including Congress and Senate. we stand together as one with our ideas, with our ideas, not just for politics and principles and legislation, but we stand together as one with ideas to get the word out, to actually campaign and to bring people into the flock, to actually reach out to our Republican friends and Democrat friends who are independent thinkers, but just haven't been able to cut the strings. Let's cut those strings and bring them into the family. And I think that's got it.
I'm going to say a few words here. This is going along with what Jason just said. In my own life, politically, I was a lifelong Republican up till, X number of years ago. And I just come to the point of having a feeling, I guess it was discernment, that there was something wrong with the Republican Party. And what I was actually feeling and seeing was a shift, a shift from a good platform, a good party, being basically constitutionally oriented, to a party that was moving left of center line, And when I got that feeling, I thought, you better investigate and check out some of these other parties. And so I was a member of the Constitution Party, which is a good party too, I was a member of that party for a while, but there was a lot of politics playing out there, and so eventually I thought, well, you better try the other party. That's this one here. And I feel so good in this party. It's you just have an inner feeling of confidence and security being a member of this party. At least that's how I feel, and I hope you do too. And anyway, take a good look at this party, and I'm sure you'll get a feeling of deep gratitude and thankfulness that this party exists, and that we can be members of a constitutional party. Okay, I guess we'll move on our program. We're going to hear from some of the candidates, and we're going to start with Davis County, Tammy Long.
I'm glad there's a step here since I'm a little bit vertically challenged. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today, and I'd like to thank all of you for this opportunity. I was the mayor of South Weaver City for the last 4 years, and I decided to not run for mayor again, to a lot of my city's dismay, so that I could run for county commissioner, because there's plenty of issues that need to be resolved. One is that a lot of the county commissioners don't like to follow their own code. And so I thought, okay, this has got to change. You're supposed to follow your code. And if the city isn't following your code, you need to enforce it. And I could never get any enforcement. And so I thought, okay, there's one reason. But it's a big reason, because there's a lot of code being here too. I've always been called, when I became mayor, they started calling me pleasantly persistent. Before that, I was called tenacious. So it was a little bit nicer way to refer to being tenacious. But I don't do anything to make anybody happy. I don't try and please everybody. I try and follow the rules and the law. And I repped for 12 years. For 7 of those, it was 3 sports. So I got used to not making really anybody happy. Because you don't make everybody happy when you're a rep. And it's interesting how I got into being the mayor is 20 years ago I had a resident that said he wanted me to run for mayor, and so there's a lot of other residents. And I said, well, why? I don't know anything about that. And he said, well, you'll tell them no. And I said, well, I have 3 teenagers and a toddler. When she graduates, I'll run for mayor. I didn't do the math. They all did. She happened to graduate on election year for mayor. And I was on an e-scooter, and was going to be on an e-scooter the majority of 2013. And they came to my house and they said, you promised us, and you don't have to be able to walk to be the mayor. And I said, but I can't campaign. And they said, we've already started. And I said, I haven't even signed up. And they said, yes, but we know you're going to win. And even had one of them that said that he told his family that if they didn't vote for me, they were out of his will. And I said, I think you can do that. And he says, it's my money, I can do whatever I want. And I said, okay, but, you know, on an Easter, I can't go around door to door. I can't even get up to most people's doors, so. They said, well, we'll campaign for you. We've been campaigning for years for you. And I said, okay. And I thought, I'm not going to win because it's the Good Old Boys Club, and the guy I'm running against has been in office for 32 years between council and the mayor. You guys have been voting him in forever. And I got, I believe it was 72% of the vote, which really surprised me, because I didn't even think I was going to get 50. And so it was a challenge. I had staff resign by multitudes, even though I couldn't get the council to adhere to even the state code, which requires 10-3-916 requires that the recorder or the treasurer cannot leave their position until their replacement is trained and qualified. But I could never get anybody to have them adhere to that. And one of them only gave me 2 days' notice. So that was quite a chore, but a lot of that was to make me resign. It was to intimidate me to make me resign. But it didn't work. I don't intimidate easily. And they say, what, how's that? And I said, well, all the years reffing, and I'm very much a middle child. I was the 7th of 11 kids. So that's how I got to be what I call, they call pleasantly persistent. We'll just say that. That's the nicer way to say it. We call lovers. So, but I really appreciate this opportunity, and I've had many people ever since I was only in office 6 weeks when, because my first statement after being elected was I had an issue with the city manager. He tended to work from home a lot, which I didn't agree with. And being a crossing guard for 12 years with the city, I had many run-ins with him and a lot of issues with him not being available to contact when there was an issue. And so my first statement was, if he can't work from the office, there's the door. 6 weeks after I was in office, there was the door. And they said, well, we're not going to get anybody to apply. I had 26 people apply for his position. Only 11 were qualified, but still that was a large number for a small city. For some reason, and some of them were from out of state, which really surprised a lot of people. But they said I'd have a hard time getting anybody to apply for my planning commission. I'd have to beg somebody to be on it. My first year, I had 8 people apply for one position, and it kept being that way for my whole term. I had numerous people always applying. And when my city attorney gave his resignation to do litigation, I had 3, they retired from being city attorneys, wanted to come out of retirement to be my city attorney, because they liked my standards. And they knew that they wouldn't have to try and keep me to uphold the law, because I already had a record of that. And so that was, I made it tough because they were all really good applicants. And but I have never had a problem getting people to apply for the positions, although they said, no, nobody's going to apply because you're such a tyrant. And I said, I'm not a tyrant, I just want them to do their job. That's all. And so, but I had a lot of residents that said, okay, after you've done for 4 years as a commissioner, you have to come back and be the mayor. I said, I don't know about that. But so there's a lot of them that still want me to be the mayor because of how strong I am, and I don't have any bullies, and I contribute that to being that middle child and being around. So I really appreciate the opportunity to run on an independent party, and I got a lot of support because I've had people pushing me for 4 years, and they've always said, we don't care what you're running on, we want you in office. So I hope that November is very interesting. Can't wait to see who my opponent is, since I know all of them too well. So thank you, and we'll move on to let you announce the next person. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. We appreciate that. And we want to extend to you best wishes in your election efforts. Let's see, we'll now hear from Tommy Williams, State Senate 15. Is he here? Okay, we'll move down to State House 40, David Eltz.
David's running, left solid around 9:30, so he'll be late.
Okay.
So let's go to the
We'll go back there. Okay, let's go to State House 75, Keith Kelsch.
That's me.
Okay.
I decided to run on the last day when you could actually put your papers in. A friend of mine, Kate Daly, she's on the radio down in southern Utah, and she says, hey, somebody please run against these guys, they made some bad decisions. And so I actually drove to the county clerk and put in my papers, didn't check with my wife, didn't talk with the Lord, didn't do anything. Just put the papers in, and so we're now running for the state district for 75, which is the St. George area, that little bowl area, goes over to Tomaquin, to the Green Valley, goes up SR 18, all the way up to Enterprise, Pine Valley, kind of a rural and metro mix. So if you know anyone, family, friends that live in that area, please tell them to vote for Keith Kelsch, double K, special K. That's a great way to remember my name. I'm running on a platform, an interesting platform. I don't know if that's me or if it's standing on something there. I call myself a genuine optimist. And a genuine optimist is not a person with a great attitude. A genuine optimist is a person who believes in something and is willing to stand for that. The word optimism comes from the Latin optimum, or best thing. That's what optimism means. But we've construed it to mean some great attitude, and somebody's a well-spoken person that makes you feel good about their personality. Now, that's not what optimism is. There's a source of optimism. There's a belief in optimism. And it comes with the idea that you believe that there's a better world coming. And I do believe in that. For example, a lot of Jews and Christians don't teach, or they don't believe that heaven can be established on earth. Well, I do. And I can talk about it economically, I can talk about it in a representative forum, I can talk about it in all kinds of fashions. For example, and this may help you understand where I'm coming from. The real origins of our Constitution happens to be with the Native Americans. Most people don't know that. But there was a gentleman back 700 AD, they called him the Peacemaker. And all the Native American tribes was fighting and bickering and creating discord, and stealing wives and robbing and pillaging. It was kind of not a good thing. So he had a vision to bring all the tribes together. Let's come together and discuss this. So basically they formed what was called the Iroquois Five-Nation Confederacy, eventually turned into the Six-Nation Confederacy. And that was a very interesting way to organize, because you had this longhouse, and they had little fire pits inside this longhouse. And the Seneca over here, the firekeepers, the Onondaga, these different tribes came together, and each tribe, anytime anything was passed to the entire body, it had to be approved in that tribe by unanimous consent, by this tribe by unanimous consent, then this tribe by unanimous consent, and that tribe, etc., etc. Okay? And so what happened was that, I don't know if that's me or what is that? Sorry. But what's interesting is that nothing was controlled by a medicine man, a chief counsel, the concept of an executive model, a president of all, didn't exist. It was a completely headless body, all right? And it was the longest lasting, and still to this day, one of the longest lasting participatory governing models in world history. And when the Founding Fathers created this thing called this legislature, they had the Great Compromise. Small states, big states, you know the battle they had. So the small states felt overwhelmed by the big states. Well, they had what's called an idea, it was called the Great Compromise, that came from the Iroquois. All right? They had an idea of a decentralized headless model, which was a better way to check and balance. Now, if you look at this on city councils, you look at this on county commissioners, I was just talking earlier today, we were talking about this issue with city councils not having an appropriate representation, meaning when you vote for a city council person, you're competing with the body at large. And so what happens is you create power centers inside the community. And so everyone's appealing to the power center to get voted in, not a constituent demographic area inside the community that gives you more accessibility, more dialogue, more face-to-face. My whole mission in life is to decentralize power as much as I possibly can, everywhere I can. More voice, more dialogue, more common consent. Common consent is far superior to the popular democracy. Right? And if you look at every great document in world history, from the Magna Carta to the Charter of Liberties, to the Iroquois Five-Nation Confederacy, even the French tennis court vote, 550 odd people unanimously agreed, okay, to create the rights of man. It became bloody after that, of course, in the French Revolution, but it was the first opportunity where the third estate, you know, the people that weren't recognized very well, they were pushed out onto this tennis court and say, we're the elites, we're the first party, you guys are the third estate, you're not part of this representative parliament anymore. So they all agreed that they're not going to leave that tennis court oath until they reach a consensus on something. They did. It became the Declaration of the Rights of Man. So every time something great happens is when people come together by mutual consent. There's not a president in charge, there's not a single body in charge, there's not an executive. If you think about it, even the Constitution, 55 delegates, right? They all wrestled and they all came to an agreement. It wasn't easy, but they did. That's the model. That's the model of liberty. It's also the model of freedom. We get hung up on the idolatry for authority. My wife is in Salt Lake City right now at the Republican convention. That's the idolatry for authority. We're going to worship these individuals that they're going to come and save us. No, we need voices that are going to defend against liberty. And my first defense on liberty is community liberty, and here's why. Okay? The Libertarian Party is all about rights and inalienable rights. That's great. The problem is you've got this statist mentality. And I teach at Dixie State College. I've been in higher education for a number of years. I've seen the statist mentality. They always push for central control. They think they're going to solve it at this administrative model from a distance. Okay? Well, the idolatry for authority is always pushing for power centers and power structures and all that kind of stuff. It's really, really bad news. So I came up with a concept. I don't want to belabor this any longer, but I came up with this concept of we're not the far right and we're not the far left. In fact, there's two things worse than that. It's called the low left and the low right. And the low left is always statism. It's always pushing, now it's globalism now, all right? And then the low right is always about fundamentalism and trying to impose some sort of an authority. Well, the far right is libertarianism to some degree, which is okay. It tries to stand for inalienable rights to some degree. But what is the far left? It has a problem. And the far left's problem is that it can't stand inequality. There's an injustice somewhere. So their solution isn't local voice, isn't local people, it's this state or the federal government, the UN. But I believe in two things, the high right and the high left. And what are the high right and the high left? The high right talks about the conservation of energy, the conservation of wealth, the conservation of voice within the community, as close to the people as you possibly can. And what is the high left? That's the classical liberal. The classical liberal believed in one thing. The silencing of discussion is an assumption of infallibility. That's from John Stuart Mill's essay on liberty. And some of these original classical liberals believed in open dialogue, open expression. Let's get it all on the table. Let's talk. Let's discover stuff. That classical liberal has been dead for a long time. We need to reawaken them. And then we need to reawaken the conservative mind that wants to conserve voice and energy and wealth as close and as locally as you possibly can. Get away from all this centralized control. That's really the peacemaker's vision. That's really what an independent American's voice should be. Hey, you know, I'm not going to want central control. Let's get it on the table. Let's come together by common consent. I could talk forever. Follow me on thegenuineoptimist.com. I put out a weekly podcast. You'd love to listen to, get some feedback. You can even leave some messages and comments on the site. But you go to genuineoptimist.com. I have a graph that explains what I just talked about. If you know anybody in St. George and the Southern Utah area, please let them know about me. There's a lot of Republican people down there, but I believe I can win this race with a lot of support. Thank you very much. Yes. I believe so, yeah. She's the one that inspired me, and she sent me a message. Keith, we need to run. So she's the one that inspired me to run. I'm running against Walt Brooks. His father was a famous football coach down there, so he's running on that name, Brooks. But he doesn't have much experience, and he's a terrible voting record. He's got a 63 on the Veritas score, and he voted in favor of that the centralization of the State Board of Education. I don't know if you know that policy that was put out there, where they actually wanted to abolish the State Board of Education and replace it with a superintendent. With one superintendent. Appointed by the governor, but supervised by the Senate, which is really bad news. Because it's more centralization, and he voted for that. That's the reason why I'm standing up against him. Okay? Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. It's easy to see you're an impressive candidate. We're excited. And we extend best wishes in your election efforts. Okay, we're going to drop back here. David Elks here. Okay. State House 40 candidate David Elks. Let's hear from you.
Thank you all for being here. We have learned over the last 10 years that process with the Independent American Party brings a few people out, and who are they? We're independent, each one of us. Each one of us was born, each one of us has a name. Each one of us is known individually by God. Each one of us makes our own choices. When we're going to eat, when we're going to go to sleep, when we're going to wake up, what job we're going to do, if we're going to go to school or not, if we're going to learn some more things or not, if we're going to... A million choices we make every day. We show up. We show up and we're independent. Well, what brings us here? What brings us here together then? If we're all independent and we all make individual choices and we all do different things, what brings us together? We're Americans. Think about it. An American has a reason to make choices. An American has a reason to look out for their neighbor. I mean, that's a phrase you hear from, religious groups with different things and stuff. But I'm talking about Americans. And you think in your heart of who you are as an American. And that's where real unity comes from. Now, I'm running in District 40 up in Mill Creek in Holiday, Utah. It's been a bastion of the Democrat Party for generations. And the people up there, we just heard a great comment on right and left, and some things about Democrats and Republicans and things. And we have really allowed the system to subtly take us down a path that has absolutely nothing to do with the function and the purpose for which this Constitution was written. There isn't anything that the rules and regulations of the Demo Republicrats with this document. Absolutely nothing. I do not consider the Demo Republicat system American at all. Okay, it's a tyrannical, closer to other types of governments that we've seen throughout history, whether it's a monarchical thing, whether it's a communist type of thing, whether it's an oligarchy, tyrannical elitist group. Okay, and I wish there was some hard and fast Democrats or Republicans here to look me in the eye on that. And I've been telling them this, fine. I don't have a lot of nice things to say about that, and I'm not interested in the rules and regulations. Now, the thing is, there's one thing, in the larger government, the entire country, getting elected is about either doing something or making something happen or creating some solution. The only function of that is to take Ponzi scheme money from the Fed and dole it out to people and get them to follow whatever you want them to do. That's it. Okay? I don't have to explain anything. There's nothing else that happens. Okay? They take our tax money, they give it to the bankers, and the bankers give whatever they want, whatever they officially write down and ask, and we go into debt. And we live entirely on debt. It's not a solution. The principles behind what the people wrote here have to do with real solutions. Now, in this party, we have principles. And the first one is that, I'm going to paraphrase it basically, or make a comment on it. The first one is that actual liberty comes from God. Actual liberty is why we're independent in the first place. Actual liberty is why we breathe. And it applies to every human being on the earth. It's nothing to do with wherever you live, wherever you are, whatever it is. Liberty is where you get your name. We're all kind of equal because we all get here because we have a mother and a father. Now, a lot of people aren't even concerned about even knowing that they have a mother or a father. Now, the problems that we have are part and parcel of being followed for a long time down this solution path of money. Governments are necessary. In District 40, we have a combination of a little bit of lower middle class. There really aren't a lot of poor people in District 40. They wouldn't want to say they're poor, but we know what real poverty is. And there's, it's hard to say there's middle class anymore because the balance of debt and the kinds of things that are going on. But then there are the upper middle class sections of District 40 as well. District 40 is a fairly in relationship to socioeconomic and being able to accomplish and being able to grow up, and in the past, of course, grow up, do well in school, get a good job, and go to work for the people who run the Fed, basically, because that's when you get a job, you fill out your W-2s and send your taxes, and you get all the money back that you need in whatever system or organization that they have done it. And the people there are really pretty comfortable in the situation. So they're not going to like what I have to say as solutions, because they aren't even going to believe they are solutions. And I am out to, we have another principle that we talked about in this party, one of the 15 principles, that has to do with real money. And real money is not of interest at all to the Democrat system. It doesn't work. It will crash. It will break that system. So you will never see it happen as long as these rules and regulations are in power. We will not ever see real money. What is the solution to destroying the rules and regulations of that Demo-Republican system? The solution is destroy the money. That sounds kind of strange. What would we do if there is no money? Well, we'd get rid of the government. That's what we would do. The government would finally completely shut down and go away. What are we left with? We're left with independence, and we're left with Americans. And the fact that we have been fed and spoon-fed to believe that we need these rules and regulations of government is flat out a fallacy. What we need are real people recognizing real activity and real solutions. Now, I'm a construction guy. I'm currently working on a project for a fellow who bought what was originally historic property in Hmura, Utah. And there's been some additions to it, so the building is no longer historic, but the district is a historic district. This building is going to be put together with a combination, it already has been a combination of residential and commercial use building. It's called a multi-use building. This is not going to be one of those giant high-rise things next to the railroad tracks that the UN has decided through Envision Utah that we're going to build and follow up with population redistribution. It is a building that's going to allow people to function. They're going to be able to make choices, use the space in such a way that will solve a combination of independent problems and some local needs. People need things. For instance, one of the sections of the building has been a barber shop for, I believe, over 50 years. The building goes back, well, the register of the building says 1938, but clearly there's evidence in the building that it goes back long before that. And the nature of having a space, having boundaries, defining within those boundaries what is best to be done in relationship to service, implementation, and filling the needs of people. That's what we do as a community. That's what we do as people. Now, the relationship of trade, and we're not going to go get our haircut and necessarily have somebody bring us a bag of tomatoes to pay us. Okay? That's probably not going to happen. Wouldn't be too bad certain times. There wouldn't be anything wrong with that if we could make that choice. And we could write it down on the books, on the ledger and stuff, and we could maybe send a tomato, to the state building to pay our taxes. Now, obviously I'm being a little bit facetious, but the principle behind this is what is needed to rewrite on the hearts of the people. Around 750 BC, there's a comment written which we happen to find in the Torah, and it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and of course it's also in the Old Testament. And the statement says that there will be a time when people will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Now, why would people do that? They would do that because their hearts are changed. And there's no way they're going to even want to think about using precious metals, using resources to end somebody else's life for whatever reason. Now, we're a long way from that right now. But the idea in our hearts that we can choose a better path is what this document was written about. This document was written to provide us the opportunities to learn, to grow, to ask the hard questions and seek for solutions. Now, my mother said a simple thing, David, if you don't like what's going on, then go get involved and change it. Now, we've learned, to a certain degree, we learned from Jason Chaffetz that you can't get elected and go and try to change things, okay? Now, a lot of us don't particularly like what happened to Jason Chaffetz or what he did or some things that's not the point. He did go up there, he did realize he was up against a brick wall, and he did realize that the kinds of things that are in his heart are not going to happen in Washington. And he left. And I basically admire him for that. Why then me, running for District 40? Why would an independent do this? Why would I go into a serious Democrat area to wake people up? Well, you just heard of the previous speaker that there needs to be some waking up of people. There needs to be some realization of what's going on. That is what the Independent American Party also is about. Focusing on what can be real money is important. Focusing on what the principles of this are in relationship with independent Americans and choosing to seek that government is here for a real solution. That is basically what I'll be running on. I will be talking to these fellows as much or little as they want to. And my campaign will be based on block parties. Got a few people that are putting some signs up in their yards and going around in the neighborhood, knocking on every door and inviting them. I'm going to bring a grill and cook some hot dogs and feed people hot dogs and tell them about who they really are. I'm David Else. Vote for me for District 40. Questions?
Yeah, when you talk about the real money, are you familiar with Ellen Brown? She's in California. She's written several books, but she's an advocate for state banks, like the Bank of North Dakota.
That one is one that I haven't studied, but that sounds like it's down my line of that. I have a good friend who runs Liberty Bank in Salt Lake. They have one branch now. And I've learned a lot from him, although he runs within the system. But we've had the discussion about this. How can we break out? How can we establish, this? And the exciting thing is that the things that are happening internationally with money and the things that are happening with the dollar being in debt, there are principles of banking that still work.
Well, the State Bank of North Dakota is actually one of the most solvent banks in the country. During the Depression, it put all of its revenue from the state into its own bank, not into a private bank, into its own bank, and therefore it can actually fund a lot of its own infrastructure projects. Huge wealth benefits from having your own bank.
Now, I want you to understand what is being said here, okay? Anything you choose that you give a value to and it establishes as currency, whether it's a tomato for a haircut or whether it's in this bank, it's the trust of the people involved that make it work, right?
Yeah, that one.
That's the thing.
Are you running for a state position or what position?
State House District 40.
Okay, you and I come together, let's write a bill to.
Exactly.
We can get Ellen's help and we can initiate the state of Utah Bank. So rather than put it in Zion's bank and make all that money off of us, we put it in our own bank, damn it. That's citizens.
Well, I appreciate the comment because this is called I hope you can see the factions underneath this of how this is a solution, okay? By rearranging the trust levels. I go down to the trust levels. I don't really care what the currency actually is, okay? It's the trust levels that are of value and that make it work. And I have a whole rewrite for public education system based on this same faction, and of course it's all locally done. I've been doing this for years, ever since I got kicked out of being a teacher because I was way too wrong for those guys. Question?
So, back when I ran against Kirk Bramble for the state senate, on my blog website, jasonpatriot.com, I have a piece of legislation. I can't remember if I included the notification of the Federal Reserve Bank Act.
I think you did.
But I also have, it's actually legislation that does establish a state bank. So that might be some ideas.
The entire process of that, now it's unfortunate in California because they are working on creating more elitism, and they recently passed their legislation. Now it's gone to 3 states, where they're breaking up California into 3 states. Since I was young, they've been talking about 2 states, no, they're in Southern California, but they could never figure out how to fix the water situation. So they're doing it in 3, so they can, always somebody else is to blame for things. And they'll never get there, even though if Ellen has the thing, if she's in California and is working on it, I think it's great, because it's still a solution. But real money starts with real security and starts with real trust, and that is an American absolute foundational principle.
Thank you, Dave. All of that was well received. It's easy to see that Dave's an excellent candidate, and we wish him well. We think he'll do well. Let's see. Let's now hear from Greg Duerdan, 3rd Congressional. Oh. Great. Okay.
Let's recognize Will as the founder, since Kirk Cosby's not here.
Okay. Will, could you come up here? We want to take a little time here to express our appreciation to Will as our local founder and our national chairman. We're going to turn a little time over to him. Let's give him a big hand here.
Well, first, I'd like to, won't go any further, I'd like to express appreciation to our state leadership, Christensen, Dan, and Marilee. I don't know where Marilee is, but you tell her we appreciate what you've done. I like these signs. Where did they come from?
Young Sam Bannon,
Got it.
friend of mine.
Okay. About 25 years ago, I was state chair in Utah, and we were just getting candidates. And I think we had, I don't know, close to 20 around the state. And my wife, Ruth, says, who are you going to have running our House district? And I said, I haven't been able to find anybody. I guess I'm going to have to run. And she says, do you want me to run? And she has always said, I will do anything, but I won't speak. I won't be up in front of people. And boy, she shocked me. And I said, yeah, do you want to run? She says, I feel that I ought to. When she says I feel, then I pay attention. So, she ran, the Republican had had on his team a friend of mine. And so they came and talked to us and sat on my couch and says, we need to join forces or we're going to get a Democrat elected. Democrat. So Ruth talked to him for a bit, and then I started asking him questions about issues that were important in Utah at that time. And he wasn't stupid, he was ignorant. He just didn't know anything. And why he was running, I had no idea. And finally, Ruth turns to him and says, if you are worried about getting a Democrat elected, then you better work harder. And we went ahead and did the best we could with very little money. We had 3 debates. And I love women candidates. Tammy, you've got an unfair advantage, and we took advantage of this as much as we could. And so we went down to the first debate, and she says, what are we going to talk about? And I said, well, talk about the things you're interested in. And she did. And ladies first, she got up and said her piece, and the other 2 talked on her issues. They didn't bring their issues, they talked on her issues. And the second debate went the same way, the third debate went the same way. The Democrat was a socialist. He was an education administrator, and I'll tell you, and he got up the third debate and he says, oh, I've always been a great believer in freedom, which was a lie, because he started preaching his socialism in his first and second debate, and it didn't go over well, so he decided he'd change. Well, what happened was the Republican won, but Ruth had trained him through the debates on the issues. And he went up and did a good job, whereas if it hadn't been for the Independent American Party and her candidacy, he would have gone up there as ignorant as he started. And that's what you can do. Let me just throw out a couple of statistics, and I got these from Greg. Greg, good work. 7 out of 10 Americans say that 2 major parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, do not represent them. That means that 70% of the Americans are awake. The others are asleep because the Republicans and the Democrats do not represent them. 84% of millennials find a third party is necessary. 58% of Americans, I think 58% will win most elections. What do you think? 58% of Americans are likely to consider voting for a third-party candidate in lieu of the Republican and Democratic candidates. 20 years ago, that was not where it was. Now, that's where it is. And I hope that you will be optimistic. Let me just tell you one more story. Willie and Jake were Civil War veterans. And the Civil War was over, and they said, what are we going to do now? Well, let's go out and be cowboys out west. They were in the cavalry, so they got their horses, and they rode out west, rode across Texas, and finally ran out of money in Arizona. They said, well, we'll find a job here as a cowboy. We get $30 a month and food. So they go into town, and the Apaches were on the warpath. And all the ranches were shut down, no work. But they noticed at the sheriff's office that anyone who will bring in an Apache will get $50. So So they said, well, let's go out and hunt Apaches. That's better than cowboying. So they put their last money into food, cartridges, and off they went. Well, they hunted and hunted and hunted and saw nothing. So they said, well, we're out of food. Let's just hunt all day tomorrow, and then we'll go in and see if we can beg for some food or do something. So they slept, and Willie wakes up in the middle of the night, and there's the biggest Apache he ever saw with a lance pointed right at his throat. And he looks very carefully around the campsite. There's 12 other Apaches in there going through their stuff. And he very carefully reaches over to Jake and says, Jake, wake up, we're rich. I want you to be as optimistic as Willie, because we've got the opportunity right now if we will use it. So let me just tell you what we have on a national level. We have 50 Facebook, yeah, that's probably right to slip there. Facebook sites for each state in the union. We have a list of 6,400 emails of state legislators all across our nation. We can contact every state legislator. We've got a system set up so that it just goes out and we can contact them. We started in 2016 with a series of bills, and I'm going to leave one of these back on the table back there. If you're interested in the bills we put in the last 2 years, I won't bore you with reading them to you, but let me just give you a couple of them. This is our fourth bill was the Preservation of Sovereignty and Marriage Act. That says that when the bill is passed in the state, that the state can decide whether they have same-sex marriage or whatever. It's a state issue, it's not a federal issue, so we're leaving that up to the states. If they want to have same-sex marriage, I presume, no, I was going to say I presume California would vote for that. The state legislature might, but Proposition 8, that must have been 10 years ago or so. I was in California at that time, must have been 15. And I was very concerned about that. My daughter was out on the street corner. You know, honk if you like Proposition 8. Well, she says she's never been cussed like that in her life. But there were only 5 counties out of California, and there must be 150 counties in California. 5 counties went against Proposition 8. The rest of them passed Proposition 8, and of course then our 9th district up in San Francisco decided we don't care what Californians want, we're not going to do it.
They passed it 3 times.
Yeah. So I was very concerned about Los Angeles County, but they squeaked through. I did the right thing. You might want to look at this banking bill. We took a banking bill from North Dakota. North Dakota in 1919 passed a banking bill that they had a state bank.
Citizens Bank. Citizens Bank, yeah.
Citizens Bank, yes. And we took their bill and sent it out to the rest of the states. That bank makes money for North Dakota. So that seemed to me to be a good idea. So we sent that out to our 6,400 and so on. Liberty Preservation Act nullifies indefinite detention allowed by the NDAA and the Patriot Act. Just take a look at those. That's what we're doing on a national level. We need the support of candidates and active workers in every state. And we are getting them. Last Thursday morning, a gentleman called me from Grant County, Kansas. I want to run on your party for county commish. I said, if you will read the 15 points of good government and agree to abide by those, we will support you. And so that's what we do. We've got probably, I'm not sure, candidates in 6, maybe 10, 12 states. They are still filing. So we have a national, and we are effective on the state level by contacting all of these legislatures. So I want you to be as optimistic as you can. When Ruth said, I feel like I ought to run, that is what the Spirit tells you to do. And that is what is happening all across our nation. People are standing up, feeling the Spirit of God, and starting to work to support the Constitution and to fight big government wherever it is. And you've got to, it needs to be fought on a national, a state, and a local level, because there is corruption almost everywhere. So I leave my blessing with you. Hope that you'll be able to stand for liberty and freedom. And I thank you for your time. You want this, or do you want me to put it back? Okay.
Thank you, Will. I think we ought to give Will another big round of applause. I just want to acknowledge Will's great knowledge of political affairs and his leadership abilities. Thanks, Will. We appreciate it. Let's see. Did Kirk Cosby ever show up? No? Kirk's not here. Okay. Are we going to have Greg first? Okay. We're now going to hear for State House 59 candidate Greg Hmura. Okay.
Well, I'm grateful to be a member of the IAP, and I'm grateful to be able to attend this convention. And again, I want to thank Will and Jason for their commitment and dedication to the Constitution. And they're people that I admire very much. Anyway, we are living in precarious times. The conflict that lies ahead cannot be resolved by peaceful means. The day of grace for America has passed. We are on the threshold of a Holocaust that will far surpass anything that has been witnessed or recorded since the history of mankind. We are living in the most fascinating times in the history of the world. The trials and tribulations that lie ahead will be monumental. What the founders had to endure will pale in comparison to what lies ahead for us. We must become not only the political saviors of this nation, but the political saviors of the world. If America goes down, the remainder of the free world will subsequently follow. We must work harder than ever, because the Lord expects this from us. Our failure to do so will have eternal implications. As we proceed to do our very best, the Lord will fight our battles. Because of our valiant efforts, the Lord will, it will take divine intervention in the priesthood to prevail against the greatest diabolical conspiracy known to man, which is communism. The epic battle that we face is satanic communism. Communism is a physical manifestation of the plan that Luther presented to the Grand Council. Based on communist ideology, they cannot coexist with the West. They seek to destroy our will and our agency and to enslave mankind. And let me say this, that the opposition against the Bundys was communist orchestrated. The communists have been infiltrating our government for over 100 years. They control every agency of the government, and that's what communists do. Washington cannot be saved. We are familiar with the secret combinations in the Book of Mormon. The general authorities have identified the greatest threat to the church in Western civilization. They identified this as communism, which is the greatest of all secret combinations. Our challenge is not only to right the ship, but change the affairs of the state. But we must be mindful of the greater and imminent danger, which is communism. I submit to you that the communists have profound influences in our government. The establishing of the Constitution is perhaps the greatest event that has occurred in the world since the atonement and the resurrection. The Constitution of the United States is a glorious standard. It is founded in the wisdom of God. It is a heavenly banner. The cause of freedom is the most basic part of our religion. Our position on freedom helped get us to this earth, and it can make a difference as to whether we get home or not. As you know, the Constitution is a divinely inspired document that merits our utmost dedication, our utmost dedicated efforts to protect and defend the rights of the individual. Our freedoms are God-given. The Constitution is the Word of God, but God has placed His stamp of approval on the Constitution of this land. As President Benson said, we face a constitutional crisis of great dimensions. Those who have discerning eyes, it is apparent that the Republican form of government established by our noble forefathers cannot long endure. Once fundamental principles are abandoned, momentum is gathering for another conflict. A repetition of the crisis of 200 years ago. This collision of ideas is worldwide. We must be dedicated to the Constitution and the tradition of the Founding Fathers. We must understand the principles and precepts of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. What we need in this country is a constitutional revival. We must stand by the Constitution and not give allegiance to anyone who would violate its principles. We have experienced personally those who have exercised unrighteous dominion over our agency. Our agency is a gift from God. It is a duty and obligation to oppose that which is evil. We are commanded to do so. All of you who are seeking political office are to be commended. The fight for our constitutional liberties is a noble responsibility. May we have the faith and the courage to endure in our efforts. The conflict that lies ahead will determine the fate of the world. If the rulers of this nation can afford to tamper with the sacred rights of the people guaranteed by the Constitution of this great nation and ruthlessly tear down the temple of freedom erected at the cost of so much blood and treasure, they will bring destruction upon them. They will bring destruction upon this nation and the ruins and infamy upon themselves. It is decreed and mandated by the powers of heaven that we rise up to the standard to which Moroni raised the title of liberty, and covenanted with his God to maintain liberty throughout the land. We are morally bound to defend our constitutional liberties. It will take intellectual courage, perseverance, and the faith of our founders to restore the Constitution. This task will not be easy. However, it is the right thing to do. For it is a commandment of God. Our exaltation will depend on it. One more paragraph. So let us rise up and proclaim liberty throughout the land. Let us rise up to reclaim the natural rights of man and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Let us not forget the supreme sacrifices and suffering that took place during the American Revolution. And let us not forget our duties and responsibilities and obligations to understand those principles enumerated in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I pray that we will submit to the will of the Heavenly Father and do whatever is necessary for our eternal salvation and the saving of our glorious Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. We really appreciate those remarks. So true. How many of us really take a little bit of time to think of the founding fathers? Not only the founding fathers, but the founding documents. How important do you think those are in our daily lives, okay? Have you ever really thought about the founding documents? Joseph Smith said that that the Constitution would come to a point of basically hanging by a thread, and if it were to be saved, it would be the elders of Israel that would rise up and help save this Constitution. What I say is I think that the independent American Party should play a huge role in upholding, defending, and saving our Constitution. How many of us can swear an oath and a covenant here today to that? Okay. We're now going to hear from 3rd Congressional candidate Greg Duerdan.
Thank you. It's nice to see us, the few, the proud, the real supporters of the Constitution. You know, Donald Trump was out one day walking from the White House to his helicopter, and when an assailant jumped out of one of the bushes and was coming at him with a gun, one of the Secret Service guys that was new on the job started yelling, "Mickey Mouse! Mickey Mouse!" And it startled the would-be assassin so much, you know, what's this idiot calling, you know, doing? And he dropped his gun and he got captured and arrested. And later the Secret Service supervisor came up to him and said, "What in the world were you doing?" Said, you know, yelling Mickey Mouse. And the agent kind of blushed and looked around and says, "I got nervous. I meant to say, Donald Duck." I appreciate the words that have gone before. I really support the candidates. I'm running, my name is Greg Duerdan. I'm an independent candidate for the Utah 3rd Congressional seat. As the oldest of 4 boys, I've lived as a leader all my life. My father was a BYU professor who graduated from Wasatch High School, just up the road. And he joined the Marine Corps in World War II. His father had already gone over to Europe to fight the Nazis. He came back to Utah and attended the University of Utah, met my mother, and as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story is history. Dad died in '74. Mom was a Social Security rep right here in Provo for more than 20 years, and now lives up behind the Provo Temple, the mouth of Rock Canyon. She's turning 93 this year, and she's still just as sharp as a tack and is the chief enforcer, as another lady was called, that's being laid to rest today. I always thought Barbara Bush would have made a better president than her husband or her son. But if we would have Barbara as a president and Laura Bush as vice president, I think they could still be in office. I don't know. But anyway, aside. I'm a veteran of the U.S. Air Force and a newlywed of only 3 years after being widowed twice. And now I'm the father of a blended family of 18 children. Keeping up with all those birthdays. 72 grandchildren and counting. And 5 great-grands and still counting. My family is big, and it is one of the big reasons that I'm running. I want to make this a better country, a better state, a better area for my children and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren to grow up in. But I'm not going to tell you more about my family. But for the last 45 years, I had a successful career as a newspaperman and broadcaster working all over the state of Utah. If you see my signs, those little stars stand for a newspaper or radio station that I've worked at. I've been a watchdog of the Utah political scene for more than 4 decades and believe the GOP redcoats are giving us, the voters, lip service and literally lying to the state. Back in '91, which is 27 years ago, white hair, you know I'm old. I was a board member of the Utah Foundation for Open Government, working with the Society for Professional Journalists to get the 1992 national model legislation we now know as GRAMA, the Government Records Access Management Act. We got it drafted, adopted, introduced into the legislature, and signed by Governor Baggett. It became a law. The legislature has since tweaked from a national model into a platypus, the joke of nature. Utah should be leading from the front when it comes to open government, to transparent government. And here's 1 or 2 examples, further examples of what the redcoats, the harm the redcoats have done to the state of Utah. Now, these are not ones that they will tell you about. I'm just warning you now. First, did you know that our state's public integrity grade from a third party is a D-. In 2015, the Center for Public Integrity gave Utah a D- with 7 Fs. We failed in public integrity. And that's down from what we were in 2012. We got a full D and only 4 Fs in 2012. What would happen to your children if they brought home a grade slip with a D, let alone 7 Fs? Would you say, oh, well, that's okay, go back out and play. Everything's normal. But that's what the voters are doing. The people in office are going to go back every year for another term. It's the very small memories of our voters, very short memories. They must have Alzheimer's or something. When they enter that voting booth, they send the same problem children back to learn, and they're not learning, they're not doing. That's the sign of insanity, folks. Doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. But that's not all. In 2016, the Cato Institute, a very conservative group, gave Utah another D for the size of the government for raising taxes. Oh, wait a minute. Republicans raising taxes? That's not what they're supposed to do. For rapid budget growth and the number of workers on the state payroll. This is not one failing grade, but two. And we won't, and my most likely opponent will be the one, is the one-year incumbent, John Curtis, who was mayor right here in Provo City. In 2017, he claimed to be a conservative. During the special election, stated he was a conservative, that he had cut the budget here in Provo. Aren't we all glad we're not paying as much? He had cut the size of government in Provo using conservative principles. None of that is true. With his 8 years as mayor, the city budget continued to rise. In 2012, the budget went up $44 million. In 2013, in the fiscal year 2013, it jumped $32 million. 2014 went up $19 million. Then to make up for it, in 2015, it jumped $95.6 million. And 2016 saw an increase of only $25 million. Now, doesn't that show a trend? If it goes up millions of dollars every year, that is not cutting the budget. That is not cutting the size of government. That's not a conservative, folks. And the 2017 budget was adjusted to over $35 million more than 2016. As a mayor, he signed the budgets and is responsible. Oh, but we don't understand how budgets are made in the city. The council makes the budget and he has to sign it. He has a veto power. He's the executive. And as the CEO of the city, he is responsible for the budget the council approves. Right, Tammy?
Yes, but I don't know about Provo, but in South Weaver, I didn't have veto authority, man, I'd have used it a lot.
Well, if you don't have it, you can't use it if you don't have it, right? So you don't sign it. After he was made his recommendation, he could send it back, but he never did. Mayor Curtis is not a conservative. Would a conservative forgive a $1 million debt that New Skin contractually held for taking over one block between Center Street and First South? Their building extends right over First West. They were supposed to pay the city $1 million for that privilege. John Curtis forgave. He hasn't cut taxes in the city, but has increased fees and taxes. He hasn't met a tax or a fee he hasn't loved to increase. He didn't cut the size of city government. He hasn't lived conservative principles and values during his tenure as Provost Mayor. A real conservative would have shut down the unconstitutional cable and internet service company Provo has had on his first day, rather than waiting for 6 years and selling the whole operation for one stupid dollar to Google. Congressman Curtis is not a conservative, but that claim is not his greatest lie. Our freshman redcoat congressman in District 3, before he was mayor of Provo, was the COO, and the vice president of marketing of Action Targets in South Provo. Curtis and his partner Bateman were perpetrators of multiple counts of sexual harassment, sexual discrimination and retaliation filed with the NLRB, EEOC, and the Utah Anti-Discrimination and Labor Division. 4 counts. At least 4 counts. And this is documented in the Curtis Exposed file, that the only media outlet in the state that has brought this forth is the Utah Standard News online. It's still up. You can check it out. There's a trail of incompetence and building a toxic work culture. Multiple allegations of fraud, wage claims, breach of contract by 19 employees. There were 13 tax liens on action targets during his tenure, and a wrongful dismissal suit filed in Provo Court. Utah District Court Judge Sam McVeigh said, "I'm surprised that there was no criminal investigation of Curtis and Bateman based on the large volume of rancid fish in the company, action targets." And then there's the recent lawsuit filed in March of this year over the former Provo City Police Chief, where Curtis is named again for his alleged failure to protect the women of the Provo Police Department. And as was said of another politician many years ago, read his lips. If they're moving, he's lying. And none of this reflects on the state's integrity at all, does it? It is my allegation the GOP redcoats have harmed the state of Utah through their power politics, control of government, and misbegotten petty party politics of corruption, intimidation, and corporate corruption. I suggest to voters to vote the redcoat bums out and send them home to get a real job. But without reminders on a regular basis, and that's my purpose in running, voters will forget by November. They will forget the harm the redcoats have perpetrated on the citizens of the state, the men and women of the state, and most egregiously on the children of this state. They have failed in producing an education system that's a world-class education system. We're on the bottom of the pile looking up. But I guess I'm only a little passionate about this. I want a revolution in Utah, a revolution of voters to wake up and vote for principles, not just the same R and D, red coats and blue coats. Wake up to the reality of what the red coats and blue coats have done. Americans are coming to realize this. That's why 70%, as Will told us, 70% of the nation think neither the red coats or the blue coats represent them. 54% of Republicans see a need for a third party. 68% of Democrats believe there's a need for a third party. I used to be a Democrat. I was a blue dog conservative Democrat. Yes, there are some. Just like there are liberal Republicans. Not in the state of Utah, but there are some. Democrats had a socialist and a criminal as their choice for the last presidential election. What were they thinking? And what was amazing, Hillary almost pulled it off. But we have a New York clown now as president. He's got the orange hair and everything. But Ron Paul jokes, he'd be happier if we actually had a second party. Because those two are more alike than different, he says. In a December 11th column in the Washington Post, Ron Paul said, he called Washington, D.C. a one-party system which believes that winning is more important than standing for something, thereby not achieving anything worthwhile. Ron Paul continued to say, if a new party would come together and agree on basic principles while agreeing to disagree on other less important priorities, such as individual agendas and power politics, all those things, I'll get my uppers in, a formidable movement toward